Over my shoulder, I heard the editor hang up the phone and call my name. Gunnar, summoning me into his office. This was 12, maybe 13 years ago. I don't recall the exact date of this story, nor can I swear by every last detail. I was maybe 2 years into my first full-time reporting job, writing for a twice-weekly newspaper in Newberg, Oregon. We were a small news staff, only 4 strong, and we wrote as much as we possibly could, covering everything from features and sports and cops and courts. And of course, every newspaper worth its pulp, every once in a while, uncovers a good old scandal story. So I walked into the editor's office, and what you need to know about the editor is that he is somebody that young reporters loved to work for. He was irreverent, and he was unafraid. One time, the owner of the newspaper was running for political office. And by happenstance, a TV news crew stopped the editor while he's out for a walk and asked him for a man-on-the-street interview about the political aspirations of his boss. The editor said, "I work for the guy, and I'm not voting for him." But here he was, still at his desk, still writing barbed headlines and edgy editorials. I sat down, and he slid a piece of paper across his desk to me. And on it was written the name of a local doctor and nothing more. "Got a call," he said. "Seems the doctor quit abruptly, didn't give a good cause. Check it out." So I called the hospital where he had privileged, and I called the clinic where he had practiced. And pretty soon, I was pointed to the police department. And in short order, I had a stack of police documents and an interview with a detective. And here the story started to unfold. The doctor was being blackmailed by a woman. He turned to the police for help. They set up a sting operation. He was wired. She incriminated herself, and the police arrested her. Of course, there was more to the story here. The woman was a patient of the doctor's. They were having an affair. This was an ethics violation for the doctor, and it threatened his ability to practice medicine. And it wasn't the first time he had done it. Years before, many miles away, the doctor had slept with a patient previously. He had gotten caught. And he had moved his then young family here to our town for a fresh start. Only now his past was catching up with him. His latest lover found out about the previous affair with the patient. She offered to keep his secret for a price, and he could have spent $50,000 and hoped to purchase her silence. Instead, he went to the police. Only now, the whole backstory was part of public record and discoverable by friends and family, medical board members, and reporters like me. So I had a good old scandal story for the editor, except I was missing a key element, an interview with the doctor, to give him a chance to comment, to tell his side of the story. I couldn't track down his telephone number, and so I did as I often did when I was stuck on a story, and I called the one person in town who I knew would know all the town's goings-on, and who was who? The librarian. The librarian was one of the first people I met when I started writing for the newspaper. I wrote a story for the paper about her retirement. I kind of saw her as a mother figure for like half of the town folk. If you think about it, here is a woman who had placed books in the hands of hundreds of people, watched them grow up and have children of their own, and then placed books in their hands. We became friends. She had us over for dinner with her husband and my wife. and she introduced us to her adult children, and we became friends. The librarian and I met regularly over coffee, maybe once a month, and we traded town gossip, and some of the best stories I ever wrote came from those conversations. So I called the librarian, told her what I was working on, and I told her who I was looking for, and could she help? There was a pregnant pause. Oh, Gunnar, he's family. It turns out the librarian's son was married to the doctor's daughter. And while I could not pick out the doctor from a lineup, I'd had dinner with his daughter. She was a warm and gracious host. We'd had dinner at her home. I considered her a friend. The librarian did connect me to a telephone number, and within an hour, the doctor was walking in the front door of a newsroom with his wife at his side. The doctor seemed small and unassuming, and his wife was at once resigned yet resolute to stand by her man. We walked into a conference room and sat down at a table across from each other. And there are few interviews in a reporter's life that are glamorous or even memorable, but this one I remember for how it felt, because it felt like it was out of a detective movie where the perp won't fess to the crime until presented with evidence. It's been too long for me now to remember the exact exchange of words, but I remember the contours of the conversation and how each layer of the story had to be peeled back by force until finally the whole thing was on the table. It went something like this. Well, doctor, thank you very much for coming in. I understand that you've left your practice. I'd like to write a story, and I invited you here to tell your side of the story, so what can you tell me? Well, you know, I'd been in practice for a long time and decided it was time to spend more time with my family. Is there anything else you want to tell me? No, that about sums it up. His wife was silent, as though consenting to this telling of the story. So I talked to the police, and they tell me that a woman was blackmailing you. Can you tell me about that? Yes, well, that couldn't stand. I really couldn't take it, so I had to turn her into the police. Is there anything else you want to tell me? No, that's about it. Did you want to tell me about the affair with the patient jeopardizing your medical license? Is not that why you can no longer be in medicine? Well, yes, I suppose that has something to do with it. And the previous affair, have we not established a pattern here? Is there a reason you cannot practice medicine any longer? Yes, well, I suppose there's something to it. The whole exchange was very cordial, and when we got up, we said goodbye, and it was very friendly. And you know, I could have lived with a doctor doing something stupid or immoral, but I thought even less of him and his wife for the way they told their story, for how they handled that interview. The whole putting up of a facade and saying there's nothing to see here, everything's fine. I went to my desk and I made a decision that other journalists might not have made. I decided I was going to write the story. Other journalists might have said, as a friend of the family, I'm too close to the story and I can't write it objectively. Right, wrong, or otherwise, I had a news hole to fill in the paper the next day, and I wrote the story. And I will say that I wrote it as straight and narrow and fact-based as I possibly could. After I finished writing the story, and after it was filed with the editor and gone through proofing and copy editing and layout and was safely on its way to the printer to be printed in the paper the next day, I made a second decision that other journalists might not have made. I decided I was going to share the story with the family prior to it appearing on the newsstands the next day. Reporters generally shy away from this because sometimes sources want to editorialize or change the direction of your story. But I did it. I copied the story onto 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and I took it with me as I left for the day, and I jumped in my little red truck, and I drove, not home, but I stopped at the home of the daughter. And I knocked on the door, and she opened it, and already there was a look of sadness on her face, as though word had reached her that I was working on a story about this. I handed her the piece of paper, and she invited me in, and we sat down in her living room opposite each other, I on one couch, she on the other. And it was an experience unlike many journalists get to have in their careers, where you get to watch somebody read your words and the real-time impact of it. We sat in silence while she read the story beginning to end. And when she was done, she set the piece of paper in her lap and she wept. And as she wept, I absorbed what I was witnessing. I was seeing the innocent victims of scandal. She never asked me to pull the story. She never asked me to change a word. She asked me about the interview and how her father did. And she was not surprised to hear that her father had stonewalled. She recounted the pain and embarrassment of the previous affair and having to run away to a new town. And she's told me how it was going to be all torn open again and made fresh when the whole story was made public again the next day. But when we left, she thanked me for sharing the story ahead of time so she knew it was coming. And when I left, I just drove around for like 20 minutes, absorbing what I had seen and contemplating my role in all of this. I didn't regret writing the story about the doctor. He had acted unethically. He had violated the public trust. And I thought the community deserved to know that. At the same time, I realized that I had been an instigator here. Without my reporting, the family's private pain might have remained a family secret. But because I did what I did, albeit in the line of my professional duties, their private pain was now public embarrassment. The next morning, public embarrassment. This was 12, 13 years ago, as I said. Facebook was a startup. Twitter was still an unformed idea. Today, everyone in this room has the power of the editor. And in a matter of seconds, you can publish your words and thoughts on a global platform. And daily now, we are witnessing lives ruined by stupid or hateful or inaccurate things said on social media. So tonight, I want to ask you a favor. I don't think that you can avoid scandal in your life. I think most everyone's lives will be touched by scandal at some point. You can decide how you react and how you talk about it. So if there ever comes a time in your life when you are confronted with scandal and you are in a position where you might need to write or talk about it, I ask you, please keep in mind the innocent victims of scandal. When I think back on this episode of my life, I'm immediately taken back to the driver's seat as I'm driving around, and the lessons of that time wash over me like the warm summer air. Words still matter. Facts still matter. The truth still matters. Thank you.